Before the Archaic period, temples were constructed out of mud brick and wood. And none of these survive because these, of course, are not very durable materials. But during the Archaic period, they start to construct temples out of marble and stone. And this was thought to be influenced by Egyptian builders, who were, of course, making columnar halls like Luxor and Karnak. And Greeks were interacting with the Egyptians through trade and saw these magnificent buildings made of columns and brought that desire to make monumental sculpture in stone back to Greece. Of course, in everything they did, the Greeks sought to achieve balance and order. So it probably goes as no surprise that there were standardized plans that were developed that were able to display this balance and clarity in organization. There were two standard building plans that developed in this time, or two standardized orders. And that is the Doric and Ionic orders. And I'm showing you here some basic diagrams so that you can see that there were some ingredients or architectural terms that define each of these orders. And they share some elements. For example, you can see that they are both post and lintel construction. So of course the column is the post and the lintel is the entablature. We call it the entablature here. And they are both topped with a sloping roof, which creates a triangle called a pediment. However, there are certain characteristics that differentiate these orders from one another. There's actually several orders. There's a third order called Corinthian, but that comes along later, and we'll discuss that when we get to the late classical period. But in the Archaic period, we only talk about the Doric and Ionic. And these labels, Doric and Ionic, come from the regions in which they were developed. So the Dorians developed the Doric order and the Ionians developed the Ionic order. In these diagrams, you can see that there is a lot of terminology and it might seem overwhelming. And don't worry, you don't need to memorize all of these terms. But there are some several terms that are going to be important as we talk about architecture that you should become familiar with. Let's start with the Doric order. You'll notice that probably the easiest way to differentiate the orders is by looking at the capitals. And the top part of a column is called the capital. Here it is on the Doric order, and here it is on the Ionic order. One on the Doric order is very plain, and it essentially just has a kind of flat little disc that is the top of the capital, whereas the Ionic has a bit more ornamentation, these two scrolls that top the column at the capital. In order to remember which is which, some professors might tell you that this shape resembles a D. So if you turn it on its side, the capital of a Doric order looks like a D, and the capital of a Ionic order looks like an I. That might help you. I still find that a little confusing because, of course, they both sort of look like capital I's, right? But the plainer one is the first one, and that is the Doric, and the slightly more, or the much more ornate one is Ionic. So they have different capitals. Another thing that differentiates the two is you'll notice that the Doric order column goes straight into the platform on which it rests. So it has no base, it has no foot. You'll notice that the Ionic column does have a bit of a base. So there is a transition from the platform, which is called a stylobate, to the column has a bit of a transition. There is no such transition on the Doric order. Another important difference between the two orders is up here at the entablature, right here. So here's the entablature, and here is the entablature on the Ionic. You'll notice that on the Doric order, we have a flat space here, which is called a metope, and it is framed on either side by a triglyph. Of course, tri means 3. So it's always got 3, and they look like 3 little columns, and they frame a flat space in the middle, and this would be repeating throughout the entablature in a pattern. What it does is give a nice little background or a kind of a blank canvas for a relief sculpture, and that's what we'll see here. But because it stands alone, it tends to be kind of a freeze frame. One particular scene of a group of figures or one figure that would be presented in a metope. In the Ionic entablature, we have what is called a frieze. This is also called a frieze, but the frieze here is continuous. There's nothing separating the frieze. So this actually gives the opportunity for much more of a narrative, for a continuous narrative that might wrap around the entire building. And so that is a very important difference. Both places are opportunities for sculptural decoration. Another place that we will see sculptural decoration in both orders is up here in the pediment. And this is an important term to know. It is that triangular space between the entablature and the sloping roof, which forms a triangle. Here we will often have very, very high relief that is actually so high relief it is sculpture in the round that it looks like it's placed on a stage up here in the pediment. As you watch the next video on the temples of Hera at Paestum, try to identify which order you are watching.